and Ann Arbor Rebellion next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anderson. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wall of him, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team, and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. It seems as if a rebellion is on its way to Ann Arbor. See what I did there? We kind of had, two little colloquialisms there. Rebellion at Star Wars Week. Ole Miss running Rebels, right? Anyway, we'll get to all that here in just a second. Want to thank all of you who watch us each and every week. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're not doing so already. Consider, if you are doing so, leaving a positive review. Now, if you don't like us, we wouldn't ask you to lie. Just, maybe keep your opinion to yourself. But if you do like us, we would love it if you would leave a positive review. If you subscribe on iTunes, leave a positive review there. People really do. When they're looking at new things to watch, there's so many options now on YouTube and on iTunes. People really do take a look at when they're narrowing it down. They're like, I know I do this. I'm a consumer as well. And I'm like, well, there's like 7 reviews on this one, but there's 70 on the other, and most of them are 4 or 5 star. Then that means a lot of other people are kind of like, hey, it's got a good beat and I can dance to it, so I'll check that out. We would love it if you would help us spread the word. That's how we get more people watching and listening to what we do each and every week here on Michigan Podcast. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We've got plenty of takes throughout the course of the week, even in between episodes, at Michigan Podcast on Twitter. And if you ever miss an episode or miss anything we've written or said, it's all archived right there for you at MichiganPodcast.com. Well, one is official. The other 2, we're still awaiting word. But it appears we could be getting an infusion of talent from the South. It's the Rebel Trio. And we're going to break down the 3 likely transfers from the University of Mississippi to the University of Michigan now, one by one, and what their addition, if they're all made instantly eligible, what their addition to the 2018 football team could really look like. Let's start with the big prize. And this is Shea Patterson, considered maybe the best high school quarterback recruit in the country in 2016 class, the same class that had Brandon Peterson. He was the MVP of the Elite 11, elite quarterback camp, and he presents something that I keep hearing people say, well, I don't see how he fits into Harbaugh's offense. He's exactly what Jim Harbaugh is looking for. Well, he's not, a 6'5" pocket passer. I seem to recall that Jim went to the Super Bowl with Colin Kaepernick running RPOs and pistol offenses. He changed his entire offense. Here you see touch. You're going to see elite level arm talent when you look at his throwing ability, his ability to connect on throws down the field. Look at him here, making a play when the protection breaks down, the running ability. This guy, and he's got some swag. He's got the attitude. If you looked at what held Brandon Peters back from being the starter from the start of the season more than anything else, and Coach Harbaugh alluded to it during Big Ten Media Days, and that was, hey, he's got to be louder. I want more of a leader. Well, Patterson that's Johnny Manziel you're watching with that highlight right there. Are you kidding me with that? And ironically enough, that's against Texas A&M his freshman season. Patterson has the swag you're looking for. I'm not saying he'll be as great as these guys, but his game, his size, his arm talent is very reminiscent of a Johnny Manziel or even a Baker Mayfield. He has that kind of dog in him. This is next level quarterback talent. And I think at the very least, his addition to the quarterback room, when you look at the 5 guys, when we break camp in July of next year for the 2018 season, you're going to have Kevin Doyle, true freshman, who Gatorade yesterday named. It's Washington, D.C. Player of the Year. There's some pretty good players in that part of the country, by the way. You're going to have, Joe Milton, who's considered a high school All-American, 6'5", 220 out of Orlando, Florida. You're going to have Brandon Peters, who started 3 games and was also one of the most highly recruited quarterbacks in this exact same 2016 class. You're going to have Dylan McCaffrey, who was one of the highest recruited quarterbacks in the 2017 class, who, by the way, is a quarterback a lot like what you're watching right here with Shea Patterson. That's actually Dylan McCaffrey's game. And then you're going to have Shea Patterson. This will be as talented of a quarterback room as there will be in college football next year, which, whether it's Shea Patterson or somebody else, I think greatly increases the odds that somebody with that level of competition, somebody will emerge to be ready to play championship football for a team that the rest of its 22, the rest of its 2 deep, looks like it's more than capable of competing for a Big Ten championship and a spot in the college football playoff. Player number 2 that could be making his way to Ann Arbor. So Shea Patterson has confirmed he's definitely on his way. Now, player number 2 that could be making his way is Deonte Anderson. Now, here we see him carrying the football, but where he really makes his bones is on the defensive side of the ball. His ability to make tackles, his leaping ability, his speed. If there was a weakness, and I say that loosely, when your defense the last 3 years, if you're Don Brown, at Boston College, it was number 1 3 years ago. At Michigan, it was number 1 last year. And this year it was number 3. All right, so when you're Don Brown and your last 3 college football defenses were number 1, and number 3 in the country, tough to say there's a weakness. But if you go back, watch Trace McSorley throwing in the slot against safeties in coverage. You watched Alex Hornibrook really only made 2 impactful throws in the entire game that we played against them in Madison, both of them in the slot. And there you see Deonte Anderson making a play in the slot, was against our safeties matched up on wide receivers. You're talking about a guy in Deonte Anderson, was one of the most highly coveted safeties in the country. One recruiting service had him ranked the number 2 safety in the 2016 recruiting class. This would be a huge addition to a defense that doesn't really have a lot of weaknesses except this one. And again, the competition. And you go back and look at what throwing him and Jamarick Woods. I mean, Josh Metellus, let's face it, we know he struggled as the year went on after a strong start. Well, the problem we had this year is we were so thin at safety that he knew he wasn't going to get benched. Well, now you got this young man competing. You have Jamarick Woods with another year in the program. The competition factor this adds, also a guy that if you want to, Donovan Peoples-Jones was electric at times returning punts. But if you want to give him a break because you want him more available on offense, we could certainly use, some more pizzazz in the kick return game. We started to see that later in the year with Ambry Thomas. This is another element that Deonte Anderson adds to this program. Next level athleticism. This would be one of the most athletic safeties in a Michigan uniform we have seen in many a moon if he ends up coming to the University of Michigan. Now, Anderson says, Patterson has made it official. Anderson said over the weekend, I'm committed provided I can clear academically. So he wants to come. Patterson, we know, is coming. Anderson, we know, wants to come, pending the academic red tape, which brings us to the third and final player in the Ole Miss trio. And this would be wide receiver Van Jefferson. Now, Steve, why do we need another receiver? We've recruited so well there the last couple of years. Our wide receiver class was ranked by one service last year the best in the country. Well, what you love about Jefferson, first of all, look at the size, right? So you have Tariq Black, Donovan Peoples-Jones, they're kind of size. Nico Collins has that kind of size too. But here what you're watching is a hands catcher, a guy running a lot of different routes. We've seen him run here. We've seen him run, a post route. Here we see him run an out route. We've seen him run a bubble screen. So he's running a full route tree. A lot of high school receivers don't do that. And that's one of the reasons why at Ole Miss he played right away, had about 50 catches going up against SEC defenses, and that's probably in terms of defensive athleticism, the top conference in the country. So this is a guy, too, that if you want to give Nico Collins and Oliver Martin and some of those guys a little bit more time to develop, this gives you another bridge player to help give those guys time, more competition. But I think he's a guy, in my view, I think he would start right away. I think he's that polished of a route runner. I think the only player that we have returning on our roster that is as advanced as he is in terms of route running is Tariq Black. And I think that's why we saw him take off right away early in the season before the foot injury. So these three additions to Michigan's team, if you add all three of them, then really when you look at everything else we have coming back, given the way we've recruited on the offensive line, if they can find another tackle, you would look at Michigan's two deep and you would say, I don't see a blatant weakness there, which means no excuses. This is a team with these three guys. I think this is a team that is poised to challenge for the Big Ten anyway. But with these three guys, I think you're talking about a team that if it's not the clear favorite in the Big Ten going into next season, it has considerably closed the talent gap with Ohio State. If you like what we do here, a great way to support Michigan Podcast is to support us via Patreon. In fact, if you were one of our Patreon supporters, you got access to my Instant Reaction podcast after Michigan's huge basketball win. Great comeback against UCLA, taking it to overtime, then winning 78-69 there. Biggest win of the year for the Wolverines so far. And we try to come up with new and creative ways, particularly now that we're out of the regular football season, to keep providing unique content for those of you that do support our efforts here. We greatly appreciate it at Michigan Podcast. Thank you for supporting us. And if you'd like to support us as well, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All right, speaking of Michigan basketball, we have the game tonight against Texas, which, of course, at the time we're taping this, we don't know the outcome to. But either way, the Wolverines are coming out of what many of us thought was the most difficult part of the schedule this season. These 5 games in about 3 weeks, 2 conference games, 3 tough non-conference games. The Wolverines have a chance to come out of here 3-2. I thought if we got out of the non-conference at 9-4, given the state of the Big Ten, I thought that would put us in good shape for an NCAA tournament bid come March. But now that we've about a third of the way through the season, I still think there's some key questions Michigan basketball needs to answer to be a team that will go dancing come March. These are the 3 questions that I think the Wolverines have got to answer over the course of the next couple of months, starting with number 1. Can Coach Beilein be successful if his point guard isn't the main offensive threat? You go back to Darius Morris, Manny Harris, of course, Trey Burke, who was National Player of the Year, even last year under Derek Walton. With one exception, all of John Beilein's best teams at Michigan have had the point guard be the primary offensive threat. The one exception to that was Derek Walton's freshman year, but he was surrounded by NBA players, Karis Levert, Nick Stauskas, Glenn Robinson III. I mean, that team was loaded everywhere else. And so that took some of the onus off of him. But even that year, you go to one of the biggest wins we had that season on the road at Michigan State against the Spartans at Breslin. And Derek Walton was a huge offensive catalyst in that game and really helped to turn the tide in Michigan's favor for the victory that night. So it's rare for a John Beilein team to reach its full potential if the point guard isn't the main offensive threat. One of the adjustments I think you're going to see Coach make, and you saw this a little bit in the second half, to help Michigan inspire Michigan's comeback against UCLA, is instead of the two-man game with the point guard and then the big, whether it's Deshaun Sims or it's Mitch McGarry or Glenn Robinson III or and now it would be, of course, Mo Wagner. I think you're going to see one of the adjustments I think you'll see Coach B make here, and you saw this to help inspire the comeback against UCLA, is instead of having the point guard position, which is still unsettled, we'll have more about that in a few minutes, but instead of having the point guard play the two-man game out on the perimeter with Mo Wagner, you saw Kentucky transfer Charles Matthews, who's really Michigan's best scorer, I think. And it's, the guy also has that in-between game that's kind of a lost art in today's college basketball. And I think when you saw Michigan really take off offensively is when they played that two-man game with Matthews and Wagner. I think you're going to see a lot more of that going forward because of the uncertainty at the point guard position. I think that will be the big adjustment Coach B is going to make. Now, the second question that I think Michigan basketball has to tackle between now and March to be involved in March Madness is, what is the rotation? This is maybe the deepest team that Coach Beilein has had. And I didn't say the most talented, but I think it might be the deepest. I mean, we're playing some guys that I know the coaches have very high hopes for. Isaiah Livers, Ibby Watson, Jordan Poole, who I really like. I like his swag. I like his game a lot. But those guys are playing pretty much with, a couple of notable exceptions, like, Jordan Poole against Indiana a couple weeks ago. Those guys are really playing spot minutes right now. And in past years, we would need them to be immediate rotation players, but we have the depth that that's not necessarily the case. Now, there's a great line from Dean Smith back in the day. Depth is great until you have to use it, all right? You can only play 5 of these guys at once, and when you can go 11 deep and you're sitting there and you're a coach, when do you know to pull the trigger? When this guy's struggling, I know I've got another option. In the past, I might let him play himself out of it, and that might help him to course correct. But now I have to worry, do I have too quick of a trigger? When do I make that insertion? How do I get these various parts and pieces to fit together? Coach Beilein typically likes an 8-man rotation. He's got 11 guys that can definitely play some quality minutes on this team. So I think figuring all of that out and developing chemistry, especially when you look at the sort of technocratic offensive sets that Coach B likes to run and makes Michigan so difficult to prepare for as a college basketball team, that becomes an issue when you're still putting a lot of those pieces together, and Michigan still is. I wonder if we almost have too many potential pieces this season. And then the third and final question that we've got to answer, will one player emerge at point guard? Xavier Simpson was really the catalyst to Michigan's big win over UCLA. Charles Matthews sparked the initial comeback, and then Michigan cut it to 7. Holiday came down for UCLA, had an off-balance 3 as the shot clock was expiring, pushed the lead back, I think it was to 9 or 10, and at that point you kind of thought, well, we gave it a good shot. That was probably our run, and UCLA stemmed the tide. And then Xavier Simpson came in, and we started cooking with gas. His on-the-ball defense, he made some key offensive plays. He really sparked the next level of Michigan's comeback. And then the way that he himself came back after that terrible turnover where he carried the ball twice and then double dribbled, and we had a chance to actually take the lead in the final minute. I think that's a play that probably a year ago would have broken him as a player. Instead, he shook it off and made several key plays, opened up overtime with a key 3 from the top of the key. He really was the catalyst that helped Michigan finish off one of the more improbable wins of the Beilein era. It was a crazy week last week. The loss to Ohio State, one of the most improbable losses of the Beilein era, when you lose by, in a game you're up by 20, you lose by 9. And then, this was one of the most improbable wins. You're down by 15 with about 10 and change to go. You finish the game on an 18-5 run. You win by 9 points. So you have that sort of mercurial play when you have two things. One, a talented team, and two, a talented team, though, that's unsettled at the point guard position. The offense moves the best, I think, when Eli Brooks is in the game. The problem is he's a liability right now on defense. I mean, watching him try to rotate on defense, it's like trying to watch Obieze play linebacker in space when Rich Rod was coaching here, and that's not a flattering comparison, obviously. Offensively, you can see the way the ball moves. It's a different pace for when Eli Brooks is at the point on the offensive end of the floor, but defensively, he's a liability. You're still sitting there with an all-MAC player in Jerron Simmons, the grad transfer. When Michigan was kind of searching at the end of the first half for a spark against UCLA, you saw Beilein put him in. I watched him very closely. He kind of moped. He didn't really present himself, didn't try to get open. He was just kind of out there standing around. So clearly his confidence level is shaken by the fact he didn't come right in here from being preseason All-MAC to filling that point guard slot, as a lot of us thought he would throughout the course of the offseason. So you wonder where he is at right now. And then you have Xavier Simpson, who defensively, he's Michigan's best on-the-ball defender, but he is a liability, or at least he has shown to be a liability on offense. And if you could take Eli Brooks and Xavier Simpson, put them together, well, you'd probably have an all Big Ten point guard. You don't get to do things like that. So we need either Jerron Simmons to kind of get it, have the light go on, Eli Brooks to become better on defense, Xavier Simpson to become better on offense, to truly become the player we need at the point guard position. Back here on Michigan Podcast, joined again this week by our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
Battling a little bit of a cold, but I'm warm and toasty inside my house at the moment, so feeling a little bit better.
Have you recovered from that home cooking officiating that the Big Ten crew that your youth team had to deal with over the weekend?
Yeah, we had a good win yesterday, so that helped. We got a lot of guys some playing time, and one of our like the 16th guy on our bench scored right at the end of the game, so that had made everybody feel better. But certainly, yeah, you're referencing over the weekend, I got a technical foul for arguing with the officials in a championship game. And no, I'm still smarting about it a little bit. I mean, the foul disparity was so egregious that it felt like I was Jim Harbaugh down in Columbus in 2016.
Mm-hmm. It was 17-4, right? Wasn't that what it was?
17-4, the foul disparity, yes.
I had one of those moments coaching my son's flag football team, and because I'm fairly well known in our community with what I've done for a living the last few years, I have to, when I'm in public, man, I know I could end up being a blog. So I have to always, I went from overreacting to the greatest slight to I just kind of just take it whenever I'm in public now, because I'm just so paranoid about what someone's going to put in a comment section or write on a blog or on their Facebook wall, But I couldn't handle it anymore when I watched the referees in our kids' flag football league. They kept allowing the other team to run a play before they even reset the line markers and before our defensive players were lined up. This happened 3 or 4 times, and then finally I just walked out on the field and said, "You can't do that. You guys aren't even lined up as officials. You got to give our kids a chance to actually play." And I really did not want to do it, but after a while, I got to say, screw it, man. I'm coaching these guys, and they deserve somebody to stick up and advocate for them. So props to you, man.
Well, that's honestly what the biggest part of it was for me, is that I wanted my kids to understand that I had their back, that I was going to be, defending them. And in a game where, did we play our best basketball? No, but certainly played better and deserved more than what the foul disparity was, and the home cooking that was taking place. And this team that we were playing, it was their host tournament. And I just wanted my kids to know that when someone really kind of tries to screw them, that an adult, someone that they potentially, hopefully look up to, is going to have their back.
Well, let's talk some Wolverines. Let's start. We've already talked before we brought you on about men's basketball. I'll get to that in a second. But, of course, we led off with the impact transfer news from the University of Mississippi. Maybe as many as 3 key players joining the University of Michigan. One of them already confirmed in quarterback Shea Patterson. This was much alluded to when we were talking to you last week. But now that it's official, your thoughts?
I really absolutely love this move for Michigan football, because it impacts you in a couple of different ways. If Shea Patterson is legit, if he can come in here and be the starting quarterback, if he's cleared by the NCAA, which we're all expecting at this point, if he can come in here and be the starting quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines in 2018, he gives you an immediate chance against Notre Dame on the road. He gives you a great chance to beat Michigan State on the road. He gives you a great chance to be a Big Ten championship team and go to the college football playoff. I like the fact that, I've heard a lot about how he's going to have to change the offense. Jim Harbaugh's going to change the offense to accommodate Shea Patterson. Well, let's face it, all of us this year are kind of talking more about, would we see more spread elements? Would we see some read option? It really never came to fruition like we thought it was going to. Well, now you're going to have to change it a little bit to accommodate this guy's skill set. He's an exciting player. He throws the ball downfield. He can take advantage of guys like Tariq Black and Donovan Peoples-Jones and maybe Nico Collins. He can throw the ball on the run. He makes plays when things break down around him. There's a lot to really like about Shea Patterson's game, but here's the underrated part that I think we're all missing out of this, and that is that the quarterback competition in that room gets dialed up big time. And Brandon Peters, I said this in a social media tweet, and I know you responded to it. We're about to see what this kid's all about. If he is a legitimate Big Ten championship caliber quarterback, then he's going to respond to this challenge with everything he's got, and he's going to go out there, play a great Outback Bowl. He's going to go toe-to-toe with Shea Patterson in spring ball and in fall camp. And so this is a win-win for Michigan, and it's a win for the fans because it shows that Jim Harbaugh kind of is done with taking his time, that he wants to win. We've all known this, but that he expects 2018 to be a big-time year. That's what all of us want. Is we're tired of waiting. We're tired of saying wait till next year. 2018, he's putting his cards on the table. This is what I want. This is a championship season for Michigan football, and that's exciting for the Wolverine fans.
I think the odds that somebody comes out of that quarterback room in August prepared to lead a championship football team go way up. I go back to our last national championship team. You got three guys that all play in the NFL, Scott Dreisbach, Brian Griese, and this other guy named Tom Brady, who's pretty good, all vying over the course of that summer in that camp for the starting quarterback job. And you saw what the result of that was, not just that season, but over the next couple of seasons as well, and what that did for Tom Brady's development, that competition. And I look at this, you look at the five guys that are going to be in that quarterback room when the team opens up camp in late July. You're going to have Kevin Doyle, that nobody talks about. Yesterday was Gatorade's Washington, D.C. area player of the year. You have Joe Milton, who's considered a four-star prospect out of Orlando, Florida. You have Dylan McCaffrey, who was one of the big quarterback gets in the last class. You have Brandon Peters, who was a big quarterback get in the same 2016 class that now Shea Patterson comes from. Zach Shaw, who works on your show, pointed out today on social media that since 2000, Shea Patterson's the third highest ranked quarterback recruit in the entire Big Ten Conference. So when you're putting that kind of talent in the room, in the most important position on the field, the odds when you put them all together for an entire offseason and say only one ball, best man wins, the odds that when the smoke clears, one of the guys comes out of there ready to play championship football September 2nd against Notre Dame, I think they go way up, Michael.
Well, the other thing I really like, Steve, I got to say, is if you were to go into next season with Wilton Spade and Alex Malzone moving on, if you're going to go next season, you've got Brandon Peters, a veteran of 3.5 games, as your likely starting quarterback, and your backup is a redshirt freshman, Dylan McCaffrey, that is someone with immense talent and someone that people are excited about, but still maybe is trying to get his body to the place where it needs to be. And so that was going to be your starting two, your top two going into that Notre Dame game on September 2nd. Now your top two is Shea Patterson and Brandon Peters, and maybe not in that order. It could be Brandon Peters and Shea Patterson. How much better do you feel about that top two than you did necessarily the other top two? And if it were to go beyond those guys and it came down to Dylan McCaffrey in some nightmare scenario that we just had unfold this year in 2017 with John O'Corn being the third-string quarterback, if Dylan McCaffrey is your third-string guy and has to play a little bit here and there, I'd much rather have that than have a true freshman in Joe Milton or Kevin Doyle. So, no, the quarterback room just got so much deeper, so much more experienced, so much more talented, and that's an incredibly exciting thing for Michigan fans.
Michael, I'm glad you brought up this idea of changing the offense around. I mean, I can see why really smart people on places like ESPN and SiriusXM are putting that analysis out there, because there's really no prior evidence whatsoever of Harbaugh being willing to make revolutionary moves at the quarterback position and change his offensive approach. It's never happened before. There's no precedent for that ever occurring, ever. Colin Kaepernick, San Francisco, and then to the Super Bowl. And so since that never happened, I can see why really smart people making a lot more money than us are throwing that hot take out there. I can see that, Michael.
You know, I don't know where that's coming from. I mean, I agree with you that it's kind of silly. And considering that I'm the king of the hot takes, according to my social media following, I would be out there. At the end of the day, the best quarterbacks, the best coaches, I should say, the best coaches in the country always adapt to their personnel. Certainly we saw that with the transition from Alex Smith to Colin Kaepernick, as you just pointed out. We saw it a little bit with Andrew Luck taking advantage of what he did really well. We saw with Jake Rudock taking advantage of what he did really well. I think 2017 was just such a quagmire of crap.
Yep.
That it's hard to say we ever saw the coaches truly adapt to what these guys did well. I think they did a better job when Brandon Peters came in the game than necessarily when John O'Korn came in the game. But yeah, you're gonna see them figure out what Shea Patterson is all about and figure out what Brandon Peters is all about. And because let's face it, this is not. We hope that this is not Rich Rodriguez taking Stephen Threed and Nick Sheridan and making them read option quarterbacks. I still have confidence. I think you do too, Steve, from all the conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks. As frustrating as this past season was, and even though there's some legitimate criticism of Jim Harbaugh, both of us still believe that this is the right man for the job and that he is the smartest man for the job, and that when it comes down to taking your talent and getting the very most out of them and figuring out what they do well, that he's going to adapt his offense to Shea Patterson, if he's a starter, to make the very most out of this Michigan football offense in 2018.
The two other young men that are being bandied about, let's start with Van Jefferson, receiver. Father played for the Detroit Lions, somebody that you work with at the Michigan Insider and WTKA, Sam Webb, thought a couple of years ago he thought he was going to end up in Michigan's recruiting class, decided to go to Ole Miss instead. When you look at receiver, we are stacked there with young players, but we don't have guys that are polished route runners. And Van Jefferson, we've seen him in probably the best defensive conference in terms of athleticism in America, put up 40, 50 catch seasons. So you got to believe there's a role for a guy like that, especially as you still want to you'd love the luxury of not asking a lot of Nico Collins and Oliver Martin next year. You'd love guys like that to get another year of learning the system, so that, especially the pro style offense, so that you're not relying heavily on young players comprehensively across the board. I could see him being a key bridge player at that spot.
You know, I wonder, honestly, Steve, if when we talk about these other two guys, Deontay Anderson and Van Jefferson, if Van Jefferson is not more important than Deonte Anderson at this point, for things that you just brought up. I mean, I really like the wide receivers, the young wide receivers in the room. But let's face it, nobody produced consistently for this Michigan offense in 2017. And so when you go into 2018, you need to have confidence in those guys catching the football. Michigan had 22 drops this season, according to my colleague Zach Shaw. So you want to know that they've got a guy, a potential number one, at the very least, a solid number two that can make the big plays, that can deliver on third down like we didn't see this past year, and that has a chemistry with Shea Patterson, and that's someone who Van Jefferson is. When I look at Deonte Anderson, I like Deonte Anderson to come in and compete with Josh Metellus for that starting safety spot. At the same time, I think that Jamarick Woods could be someone that contends with Josh Metellus for that starting safety spot. Brad Hawkins is someone that they're really high on, that I think has a bright future still at the safety position. And so, I think Van Jefferson, I think both of them would be big, but I would rather have, if you had to tell me I could pick between one of the two, I'd rather have Van Jefferson coming in next year than Deontay Anderson.
I probably agree with you on that, but the luxury of adding Deonte Anderson to this defense, if it had any weakness at all, and you saw it exploited heavily against Penn State, sparingly against Wisconsin, though at the most inopportune times, and it's not, and I hesitate to say that it's a weakness because it's college football. It's the NFL. In the NFL, if you put a safety on a receiver in the slot, if you put a safety on Chris Hogan in the slot against New England, where's Tom Brady probably throwing the ball, Michael? There. Okay. All right. So the idea that safeties can cover receivers in general is not not an absolute. And that's why you're seeing more teams play close to the box safeties to try and put additional pressure on a running game and on a quarterback rather than asking them to cover 20 yards down the field. But he has that kind of athleticism. That's the one thing we saw this year. Whenever we gave up a big play, that wasn't just a lapse of concentration. When we got out executed, it was one of two plays almost every time. One, a wheel route to a running back out of the backfield, and we're asking Mike McCrae to cover him 30 yards downfield. Or two, a safety that either had his back turned, covering downfield so the quarterback takes off and runs, or, I can still see Trace McSorley throwing against man coverage in my sleep at night against safeties in that Penn State game. Adding him to that, and if there is a weakness on that defense, that is it. I think that really shores that up.
No, I agree with you, and that's why picking between the two of them, I mean, really, you want both guys. And I think in a perfect world, Michigan lands both guys and adds, a huge playmaker at the wide receiver position and adds a really productive and capable athlete at the safety position. And, yeah, I mean, you look at the Ohio State game, you saw Josh Metellus play in the slot a little bit. Obviously, we saw Tyreek Kinnell do it. We saw it in the Wisconsin game. Those guys play in the slot. To me, though, Steve, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, is that, yeah, you need to have a better athlete. At the same time, I mean, how many times can we say that maybe they should change the play design a little bit? Maybe they should stop asking their safeties to play on the slot and man-to-man coverage in a situation, at least on third down, at least on third and long. How many times do they get burned? I would love to go back and look, and this can be something that you and I discussed, but go back and look in a situation of 3rd and 8 or longer in those Wisconsin, Penn State, Ohio State, maybe Michigan State, but really that was kind of a anomaly type of game. But in those 3 games, in a 3rd and 8 situation or longer, how many times did they complete and get a first down when they threw a pass to the slot receiver over a safety in man coverage? Mm-hmm. Like, how many times did it have to happen before Don Brown just said, okay, in 3rd and long situations, I'm going to play some zone? That's what I'd like to see. But I don't know that we're going to, because obviously he's been someone that's been doing that aggressive man-to-man, in-your-face type of defense for a long time.
Well, I don't know how good of a zone team we are. I actually thought Jordan Lewis was a lot better playing man coverage than zone. He was an All-American playing man coverage the last couple of years. And this year, this is something I talked about here at the beginning of the season on Michigan Podcast. We got a question from one of our viewers that wanted to know if the inexperience in the secondary would be mitigated by Don Brown's defense, because you don't play a lot of complicated zone coverages. You're not disguising. The complication is actually your linebackers and your front seven, who's coming, who's not. The other guys are playing pretty much man-man with one safety over, and that's usually Tyreek Kinnell. Okay, so that mitigates some of that inexperience factor. I do wonder if maybe with another year of experience, could we see more of that? Could I see Coach Harbaugh say to Don Brown, hey, here's how we do it in the NFL. In the NFL, on 3rd and 12, we play pretty much quarters coverage, umbrella zone, let him make the catch at the 7-yard from the sticks and come up, make the tackle, get off the field. Could we see more of that? Yeah, but I also think there's an argument to be made when you were as young in the secondary as we are. Hey, tell you what, just go out there and stick in that guy's jockey shorts and stick with him around the field, and that makes it a lot less complicated.
Well, I think there's that. I think there's a couple other little things, too, that Don Brown can do. One of them could be in situations, the reason that you mentioned Jordan Lewis likes to be good in man coverage, but David Long and Levert Hill were really good in man coverage, and that's why you use those guys. That thing about that Penn State game and then the Wisconsin game is those teams would purposely design their offense to put their best wide receiver. For Penn State, it was Deshaun Hamilton. For Wisconsin, the young man's name escapes me, but they would slide them into the slot. I think it's Davis,
a young man we recruited, actually.
Yeah, they slid him into the slot position because they knew that Michigan plays the slot with their safeties. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to do that, then why not take Levert Hill and David Long and say, listen, you're going to match up with that guy one-on-one, and so you're going to move into the slot and play him. Because in that Penn State game, the one time that Michigan was able to knock a pass down when Trace McSorley threw the slot and he threw another perfect ball was when Levert Hill was on the slot receiver instead of one of the safeties. And so there are a couple little minor tweaks that we think Don Brown could do. Again, he's a lot smarter than us, and he's not going to necessarily listen to us, Steve.
It's hard to argue when the guy's defenses the last 3 years were number one, and number 3. It's tough to sit here and spend 10 minutes criticizing him, frankly.
Absolutely. At the same time, what we're talking about are legitimate concerns.
Sure. Well, they're the kind of plays. Here's what you and I are talking about. Let's clarify this. Don Brown doesn't tiptoe between the raindrops. He's not the last son of Krypton, right? We're not. We're not celebrating the season of Don Brown's advent here this time of year. He's just really damn good at his job. But the situational football that Michael Spath and I are talking about right now, when you think you have your franchise quarterback next year and you're playing the schedule we are, these situations are probably the difference between 10-2 and we're playing somewhere in a New Year's Six bowl, or we're playing in the college football playoff. That's that extra margin for error that you're talking about right there, right? That's pretty much what we mean.
Without a doubt. I mean, you go back to, we were having this conversation on our show on Tuesday for our Michigan Media Roundtable, and we were talking about the fact that you look at that Wisconsin game and that Ohio State game especially. Those are the two that I really think were there for the taking for the Wolverines this year. The Michigan State game, the monsoon, everything that happened, that's just kind of a crazy game. The Penn State game, they were out of their league in that one. Wisconsin and Ohio State, they're both there for the taking. If you make a couple of small defensive adjustments or a few little things offensively, do you win those football games? If Josh Metellus is in the one particular play, it was ironic we're talking about this. He's playing zone, and he guesses on the guy going to the interior, throwing the ball on the inside. He steps in, and the guy throws it over his back shoulder. I mean, a couple of small plays here and there, and you're winning this football game, you're winning the Ohio State game, and now you've got yourself in a situation like J.T. Barrett and Prince Haskins. They had a couple of their long runs or in third down situations where Michigan's playing man-to-man, and all their defensive backs and their linebackers even are turned away from the line of scrimmage, and they have no idea that J.T. Barrett is running. A couple of small little changes like that, and maybe it turns out to be a 24-21 victory for Michigan, Ohio State. Maybe it's a 14-13 win in Madison. So you're right. Those are the differences between going 10-2 and going to a New Year's Day Six Bowl, or going 11-1, beating Ohio State, playing for the Big Ten championship, and a chance to go to the college football playoff.
Let's switch gears before we let you go, Michael. Let's talk basketball. I brought up 3 issues. We're about a third of the way. If you can believe it, we are about a third of the way through the college basketball season. And most of us are just now beginning to pay attention. Michigan has the game against Texas tonight. We obviously don't know the outcome at the time that we're taping this. But that's sort of the end of this brutal stretch. 5 games, I think it was in 16 days or something, against some of the toughest teams on Michigan's schedule. Coming out of this and heading into the meat of the Big Ten season, I want to get your take on each of these 3 questions. Number 1, to me, Coach Beilein's big adjustment, having to win without the point guard being the primary offensive threat. You go from Darius Morris to Manny Harris to Trey Burke to Derek Walton. The one year where we didn't have the point guard as the primary offensive threat, Derek Walton had a really good freshman season because he was surrounded by NBA players, Stauskas, GR3, Karis Levert. And so I'm wondering if the adjustment, because Beilein has really adjusted the last few years to more two-man basketball, fewer sets, more two-man basketball, and it's worked brilliantly because we've had that point guard. I'm wondering if the way he'll adjust to that is instead of playing a two-man game with a point guard, are we going to see more? And I think we saw this against UCLA. Are we going to see more of the two-man game between Charles Matthews and Mo Wagner instead?
Yeah, I think that's honestly, when you're looking at their best offensive options and the guys that are most consistent and have the chance to be the biggest playmakers, those are the 2 guys. I don't think there's any denying that those are the 2 guys. And what we saw to Charles Matthews in that second half, late in the second half and in overtime, was someone that, they were running pick and roll with him and giving him a chance to attack the basket, creating situations where he was one-on-one. And he's got a pretty good move to the basket. And especially when they're not going to overplay him. I swear that every move that he made against UCLA was to his right, and they just kept on letting him go to the basket on his right. I don't know why they never adjusted to that. And the other thing that I thought was interesting in the last couple of games is how much Mo Wagner is actually taking himself away from the basket. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I feel like at least like half of his shots against UCLA on Saturday were 3-pointers. He drained a couple of big ones. And I wonder if that's trying to take the potential shot blockers away from the basket and allowing Charles Matthews to create more, allowing Mohamed Arbor Ali Abdur-Rahman to get to the basket, allowing even Xavier Simpson, who's got a good first step and can get to the basket seemingly at will. But when he goes to the basket, if there is a 6'10", 6'11" guy waiting down there, he doesn't have much of a chance. And so he's been playing more of an outside game with Wagner the last couple of games that I've noticed, creating more opportunities for Charles Matthews to be one-on-one and creating more opportunities for Xavier Simpson to be one-on-one. It'll be interesting to watch because right now it clearly looks like Charles Matthews and Moritz Wagner are their two best options. But I'll tell you what, Steve, after what I saw from Xavier Simpson on Saturday against UCLA, if this kid can seize upon the confidence that he gained there and seize upon some of the game that we saw growing, not saying he's ever going to be Derek Walton because I don't think he hits the threes, but I do think that we could see more of the point guard becoming a focal point again if he or Eli Brooks steps up in that offensive role. Second big question I think we got to answer a third of the way through the season. I think this is the toughest challenge for Coach B. Is this might be his deepest team. It's not the most talented team, but there's 11 guys I think that could play. John likes a tight rotation, no more than 8, likes defined roles. And I think figuring out, we've got some guys that in past years, Isaiah Livers, Jordan Poole, E.B. Watson, we would have to have these guys be willing to play because of depth issues. And I got to believe it's very enticing to have quick hooks on guys because you've got more options, and that's great. It breeds competition. But as we get into the meat of the season and the rhythm of 2 games a week and everything else, you're going to want that chemistry. You're going to want that rotation tight. You're going to want guys to know their defined roles. I think managing that, particularly when you're still trying to figure out the point guard situation, I think that might be the toughest task for Coach Beilein here the last 2/3 of the season. Yeah, you mentioned 11 guys. I honestly think that what you're going to probably see is a rotation of 9. I think John Teskey has clearly showed that he is the backup to Moritz Wagner. And I actually like a couple of things that John Teskey does that are different than Moritz Wagner. He spends a little more time in the post. He's a little bit more of an intimidation factor defensively. Whether it's Eli Brooks or Xavier Simpson, whoever starts, the other one's coming off the bench. And so, that's what you're going to be expecting to see there. And then you mentioned Jordan Poole and Isaiah Livers and how they fit into it. And I'd like to see more of those guys going forward. Isaiah Livers has to really truly work on bringing something offensively, because if he can do that, we could and should start to see less of Duncan Robinson, who has been probably one of the biggest liabilities on this team so far. Hopefully he breaks out of a scoring slump tonight. He's missed 28 straight field goal attempts, by the way, Duncan Robinson has. He's missed what? 28 straight field goal attempts. Can you believe that? I'm not even sure how to respond to that. I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. Yeah. 28 straight field goal attempts he's missed. Blew me away, that number. I had the same reaction when they said that on CBS Saturday during the UCLA game. Now, of course, we don't know what happened tonight with the Texas game, but I had the exact same reaction that you just had alone in my man cave when they said that. There was nobody there to watch me have it, though. I was just having it with myself. Well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what you do it by yourself, but in your man cave. But yeah, there's been a couple of stats that have blown my mind. I saw one from our team that we don't like to talk about. We don't talk about on this show, the Lions, that they had. Did you see that stat? They had like a 12% success rate on power plays. Yes. Running plays. There's something like 4 for 15 this season on 3rd and 1. The Lions are 4 for 15 or something. So this is not what this show is, but I'm just trying to come back to that Duncan Robinson stat, and I don't even know what to do with that. But it's hard to even process that. You feel like when you hear something like that, you feel like Hal 9000. You just want to go, good morning, Dave. You don't even know how to process a stat, because if he's not making shots, he shouldn't be playing. Then he offers you really nothing else on the court. Yeah. On the other hand, the guy's made some big shots, made a couple big shots down the stretch last season. So this goes back to what I was saying with the rotation. Do you give up on a guy that's made some big shots for you in the past and assume he's going to shoot himself out of it? On the other hand, how long do you ride him when you've got some talented guys sitting there that could be taking his spot? I think how Beilein manages this, and I think it's good because next season, I think they're going to have just as much depth next season as well. And so I think having a team of more depth, in fact, having watched every team in the Big Ten, I think Michigan State's up here, and then it's space bar, everybody else. I think Purdue's okay, kind of a top 25 kind of team. And then after that, I don't know other than Michigan State if we don't have the best roster in the league, 1 through 10. The problem is you only play 5 at once, okay? And so figuring out who those 5 guys are going to be, I think that's a real challenge, Mike. No, I think you're right, and you're right. And how do you take that depth and turn that into a positive for you? Because you mentioned that Michigan 1 through 10 might be as good as any team in the Big Ten outside of Michigan State. But if you were to ask me if they're 1 through 5, where they're 1 through 5 ranks,
yeah, I agree. They're not as good as Purdue. They're probably not as good as Minnesota. I agree.
They're probably 5th or 6th in the Big Ten.
Yep.
And the one thing I will say about next year is I think their 1 through 5 next year will be top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten, and their depth will be really good. We're going to see what guys like Iggy Brzezinski can do, and Brandon Johns, and some of these young kids coming in, and the big time Castleton. There's going to be some heated competition, but I like this team. I'm excited to see how it develops. I've had to change my expectations from thinking they were a Sweet 16 team and a top 3 in the Big Ten to probably closer to like 5th or 6th in the Big Ten. And if they get past the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament, I'll be really impressed. But I still think that John Beilein's the right guy for this. I still believe that when you look at the roster that they have this year and in the coming years, that we're going to see some really good college basketball from Michigan.
Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Insider. Michael, we'll have you back next week for our final show for 2017 as we preview the Big Ten Bowl games. But always appreciate the time, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. I hope we're getting a lot more snow this week. I hope that you're avoiding it down there in Iowa.
We are so far, and I have had this. I've attempted to negotiate with the ultimate weather maker in the heavens the last few years. It is permitted to snow the week of Christmas through January 2nd, and then cease henceforth. But I've not won that argument yet, so I'm waiting.
Well, I'm getting married January 20th, and I just don't want it. We're getting married here in Ann Arbor, so I don't want it to snow that weekend. That's all I want.
I hear you. Thanks, man. We'll see you next week.
All right, sounds good, guys.
All right, we'll come back, wrap things up here next. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, who do you think is going to start the football season opener against Notre Dame next September? 69% of you said Ole Miss transfer Shea Patterson. 31% of you said Brandon Peters. I think you nailed those odds. I think Patterson is a solid favorite to start game one. But Brandon Peters is no joke, and he was a highly recruited quarterback as well. He'll have the experience edge, knowledge of the system. I'd give him about a 30% chance of holding Shea off. So I think you pretty much nailed those results there. So well done, Twitter poll voters. Which brings us finally to this week's question of the week. William Tonneson says, why is your Twitter feed such a roller coaster during games? I'm a fan. Will, I won't apologize. It used to be a lot worse. All right, I've learned to back off a little bit, but I'm a fan. I'm emotional. I love my team. I get involved. You know, I'm invested in the outcome. I live or die with every miss, every sack, every punt. Well, when we punt, not when we make the other team punt. With every bricked free throw, which we're doing a lot right now, which is kind of nuts to have a John Beilein team that can't make free throws. But apparently what Charles Matthews needs to do is have someone walk up to him with his hand in the face and he's fading away, because he does that really good in game time. He seemingly can't make free throws, so maybe we should just say, hey, somebody walk up, put your hand in Charles Matthews' face, make him fade away. He'll make those free throws now. See, I'm a fan. I know I work in media, but I am a Michigan fan. Long before I got a job in media, I lived and died with the Wolverines, and my Twitter feed reflects that. I know I should mature and grow up and handle it better, but what's the fun in that? Fan is short for fanaticism, and I love my Wolverines, so I'm not going to apologize for living and dying with my favorite team during the ebbs and flows of a game. I get it. Some of you want me to be stoic, Spock-like, with a multiverse perspective, seeing the larger picture at all times. Yeah, I can't do that. All right, so if you can't handle the ups and downs, it's okay. I don't mind. You might just want to wait and follow me again on Twitter after the game is over. That's what that whole mute feature's for. Thanks for tuning in this week on Michigan Podcast. Next week, our final episode before we head out for Christmas vacation. It's our Big Ten Bowl Bonanza. You don't want to miss it. Until then, go Blue.